On a sun-drenched street of impossible luxury, a man in a tactical vest cornered a pregnant woman. He believed he was untouchable power. He was about to learn true power had just pulled up to the curb. The afternoon sun fell on Elysian Row like liquid gold, bathing the polished marble storefronts in a celestial glow. This wasn't just a street, it was a statement, a carefully curated cathedral of wealth in the heart of Beverly Hills where the air itself seemed filtered, smelling faintly of expensive leather and rare perfume. Lamborghinis and Bentleys glided silently to the curb, surrendered to an army of discreet valets who moved with the quiet efficiency of ghosts. Here, trouble was an unwelcome foreign concept, a vulgarity that dared not tarnish the pristine pavement. Elena Seagal, her features softened by the gentle bloom of late pregnancy, moved with a grace that defied the 8 months she carried. Her hand rested possessively, protectively, on the perfect curve of her belly. A cascade of rich auburn hair caught the California light as she exited Le Berceau, an impossibly chic baby boutique where a single pair of booties cost more than most people's weekly groceries. In her hand, she held a small, elegant bag containing a cashmere blanket, a soft indulgence for her soon-to-arrive son. She was waiting for her husband, Stephen, to collect her after a business lunch across town. She found a moment of shade beneath the deep green awning of a watchmaker's shop, content to simply people-watch. The rhythm of Elysian Row was hypnotic, a slow, deliberate dance of money and influence. But that rhythm was about to be shattered. A figure detached itself from the shadows of a stone archway. He was built like a refrigerator, wide and solid, poured into the severe black uniform of Aegis Global Security. A tactical vest strained across his broad chest, adorned with pouches and clips. An earpiece was coiled discreetly in one ear. This was Cade Maddox, Aegis's site supervisor for the entire Elysian Row district. He was a man whose past in military police had left him with an unshakable belief in his own authority and a simmering contempt for anyone he deemed civilian. He moved not like a security guard, but like an occupying soldier, his gaze sweeping the area for any imperfection, any person who didn't quite belong. His eyes landed on Elena. She wasn't a recognized regular, a tech billionaire's wife or a studio head's daughter. She was simply standing there. In Maddox's world, that was grounds for suspicion. He approached, his heavy-soled boots making an aggressive, rhythmic clap on the immaculate sidewalk. "Ma'am," he began, his voice a low rumble that was meant to intimidate. "You can't loiter here." Elena turned, a polite, slightly confused smile on her face. "Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just waiting for my husband to pick me up." Her voice was calm, carrying the easy confidence of someone who had never been given a reason to feel out of place. Maddox's eyes did a slow, insolent sweep, from her designer flats up to her face, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on her pregnant belly. He scoffed, a barely audible puff of air. "This is a private commercial zone, not a taxi stand. If you don't have business in one of these establishments, I need you to move along." His tone implied she couldn't possibly afford to have business here. The politeness in Elena's expression tightened, replaced by a cool resolve. "I just completed my business, thank you," she said, lifting the small bag from Le Berceau just enough for the logo to be visible. "And as I said, I'm waiting for my ride. I won't be long." For Maddox, this was not the response of a properly intimidated civilian. It was defiance. It was a challenge to the absolute authority he wielded on this 3-block stretch of concrete. He took a step closer, invading her personal space. The faint, pleasant scent of her perfume was overpowered by the smell of starched fabric and his own self-importance. "I don't like your attitude," he said, his voice dropping another register. "There have been reports of professional shoplifting teams operating in this area. A spotter often waits outside. You fit the profile." Elena's breath caught in her throat, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of the accusation. "I fit the profile? A pregnant woman? The best ones use a gimmick," he sneered. "Now, I'm going to ask you one more time to move along. Or we can make this official." He tapped a hardened plastic case on his belt that held a pair of zip-tie cuffs. "There's no need for that," Elena said, her voice steady despite the tremor of anger she felt. "You're making a mistake. My husband will be here any second." "And who's that?" "The King of England." Maddox's lips curled into a smirk. "I don't care who he is. Here, I'm the authority. You seem to be having trouble understanding that." He puffed out his chest, a primal display of dominance. Pedestrians began to notice, their steps slowing, their curious glances turning into concerned stares. The perfect harmony of Elysian Row had struck a sour note. Elena instinctively took a half step back, her hand tightening over her baby. She wasn't scared of him, not yet. But she was scared of what a man like him, drunk on a thimbleful of power, was capable of. "You're creating a scene," Elena stated, her voice a firm whisper. She was acutely aware of the eyes on them now, the couple in matching linen, the valet pausing with a car key in hand, the woman peering from the window of the art gallery. "All I'm doing is standing here." "No," Maddox corrected, leaning in so only she could hear the venom in his words. "You're challenging me. You think because you've got a little money, a little attitude, you're above the rules. You're above me." His resentment was palpable, a bitter poison directed at her, at the world she represented. "I think you're on a power trip," she replied, her own patience worn thin. She refused to be cowed. "I have every right to be here. Now, please, back away." That was the final straw. For Cade Maddox, her calm defiance was a personal insult, a public refutation of his entire identity. He saw her composure not as strength, but as smugness. Her pregnancy was not a vulnerability to be protected, but a shield to be mocked. He let out a short, ugly laugh. "Yeah, maybe that kid will learn some manners, even if its mother has none." And then, he crossed the line. It happened with a speed that defied the lazy afternoon heat. He didn't punch her. He didn't shove her. He did something far more contemptuous, more degrading. He drew back his right leg, his polished black boot a blur of motion, and kicked her. It wasn't a full-force kick to her stomach, but a targeted, brutal strike to her upper thigh, just above the knee. It was a kick designed to destabilize, to humiliate, to drop her to the ground like a sack of garbage. The impact was a sickening thud. A jolt of white-hot pain shot up Elena's leg, and a strangled cry escaped her lips. The kick buckled her knee instantly. Her balance, already precarious, was gone. She fell backward, hard, her shoulder and hip striking the unyielding pavement. The small, elegant bag from Le Berceau flew from her grasp, the cashmere blanket spilling out onto the dirty sidewalk. Time seemed to stutter. For a moment, there was only the sound of Elena's pained gasp and the sight of her lying on the ground, the pristine image of Elysian Row shattered. A woman across the street screamed, her hand flying to her mouth. A man in a tailored suit took an instinctive step forward, shouting, "Hey," but froze when Maddox turned his head and glared, his hand drifting casually toward his sidearm. Elena rolled onto her side, ignoring the searing pain in her leg and the scrape on her shoulder. All she could think about was the baby. Her hands flew to her stomach, a desperate, protective shield. Was he okay? Did the jolt hurt him? Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the physical pain. Maddox stood over her, his expression one of cold satisfaction. He hadn't even flinched. He looked down at her, not as a person, but as an obstacle that had been successfully removed. "Next time," he said, his voice loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "you'll show some respect for authority." He turned his back on her, a final act of dismissal, and started walking toward his security post as if nothing had happened. He believed the incident was over. He believed he had won. He was wrong. Just as he took his third step, a low growl of an engine broke the stunned silence. A black, custom-built SUV, the kind that looks like it's carved from a single block of obsidian, screeched to a halt in the valet lane. It wasn't a flashy stop, it was a stop of pure, focused intent. The driver's side door flew open before the vehicle had fully settled. Out stepped Steven Seagal. He wasn't the movie star. There was no silk jacket, no entourage. He wore a simple, dark navy Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders, dark jeans, and heavy-soled boots that seemed to grip the very pavement. His face was a mask of thunderclouds. His eyes, dark and piercing, bypassed everything, the luxury cars, the shocked faces, the security chief. They found Elena on the ground. He saw it all in a single, devastating instant, the spilled baby blanket, the pained grimace on his wife's face, the way her hands trembled as she clutched her belly. Then, his gaze lifted and settled on the back of Cade Maddox's head. The air on Elysian Row didn't just change. It froze. Cade Maddox felt the sudden, oppressive shift in the atmosphere. He turned, an annoyed scowl on his face, ready to deal with whatever new annoyance had interrupted his perfect order. He saw the large man walking toward him, his expression unreadable but radiating an aura of intense danger. Problem? Maddox barked, instinctively puffing up his chest. Get your vehicle out of the valet lane. Steven didn't respond. His steps were deliberate, unhurried, yet each one seemed to consume the space between them with terrifying speed. He walked right past Maddox, his focus entirely on his wife. The security chief was so utterly ignored, it was as if he didn't exist. The public dismissal was a deeper cut than any insult. Steven knelt beside Elena, his large frame a sudden shield between her and the gawking world. His movements were surprisingly gentle, his voice a low, rumbling whisper that was only for her. Elena? Are you hurt? Tears of pain, fear, and now relief welled in her eyes. She nodded, wincing as she tried to shift. My leg, my hip. Steven, he kicked me. The words came out choked, incredulous. He actually kicked me. A muscle in Steven's jaw jumped. A thick vein pulsed in his neck. It was the only outward sign of the volcanic rage building within him. He carefully helped her sit up, his eyes scanning her for any other injuries. The baby? He asked, his voice tight. I think he's okay. He's moving, she whispered, her hand still pressed against her womb. I've got you, Steven said, the words a sacred vow. He helped her slowly, carefully, to her feet, supporting her weight as she leaned heavily against him. Only when she was secure did he turn. He looked at Cade Maddox. And for the first time, Maddox felt a sliver of genuine fear. This wasn't some irate husband. This was something else entirely. That's her husband, a woman in the crowd whispered. Oh, that guard is in so much trouble. Maddox, however, was trapped by his own arrogance. He couldn't back down now, not in front of everyone. He fell back on his training, on the hollow authority of his uniform. Sir, your wife was causing a disturbance. She was instructed to leave the area and refused. Steven took a slow step forward. The air crackled. You put your hands on my pregnant wife, he said. His voice was soft, almost conversational, but it held the deadly stillness of the air before a lightning strike. Maddox's fear was quickly being shouldered aside by his bluster. She was resisting. That's obstruction of. He never finished the sentence. Steven's movement was a blur of economy and brutal efficiency. It wasn't a wild punch. It was a precise, open palm strike, an atomy, that slammed into Maddox's chest. The sound was like a side of beef being hit with a sledgehammer. It wasn't the impact that did the damage, it was the kinetic energy that transferred through him. Maddox's eyes went wide with shock. The air exploded from his lungs in a single, desperate gasp. He was lifted off his feet and sent flying backward, slamming into the ornate iron door of the watchmaker's shop. The heavy door groaned, and Maddox crumpled to the ground, wheezing, trying to draw a breath that wouldn't come. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Phones were already up, recording. Steven advanced. Maddox, fueled by a cocktail of panic and fury, scrambled to his feet. He fumbled for his collapsible baton, extending it with a flick of his wrist. "You're assaulting an officer," he wheezed, and charged forward, swinging the baton in a wild, desperate arc aimed at Stephen's head. It was a mistake. Stephen didn't even bother to retreat. He flowed under the clumsy swing, the baton whistling harmlessly over his head. In the same fluid motion, his hand shot up, clamping around Maddox's wrist like a vice. He applied pressure to the joint, a simple, devastating Aikido technique. There was a sickening pop. Maddox screamed as the baton clattered from his nerveless fingers. But Stephen wasn't done. He held the wrist, controlling Maddox's entire body. A brutal knee strike drove deep into the security chief's gut, doubling him over. As Maddox's head came down, a sharp, precise chop connected with his collarbone. A loud, distinct crack echoed on the now silent street. Maddox dropped to his knees, his face a mask of agony and disbelief. He was broken, utterly dismantled in less than 5 seconds. Stephen stood over him, his breathing even, his expression still a granite mask. "You kicked a woman," he growled, his voice low and guttural. "A woman carrying my child." He looked down at the whimpering man, his eyes burning with cold fire. "Now you answer to me." Maddox, cradling his shattered wrist and clavicle, tried to reach for his taser with his good hand. Stephen simply stepped on his hand. A crunch of bone and cartilage, and a fresh scream of pure agony tore from Maddox's throat. In the distance, a new sound pierced the air. The wail of sirens, growing closer. The real police were on their way. The arrival of the LAPD was swift and professional. 3 black and white cruisers and an unmarked sedan slid to a stop, boxing in the scene with practiced efficiency. Officers spilled out, hands on their holsters, eyes scanning, ready for a volatile situation. What they found was a scene of surreal stillness. In the center of it all stood Steven Seagal, a silent monolith of fury, his body positioned protectively between his trembling wife and the man now writhing on the pavement. The crowd of onlookers, phones still held aloft, parted silently for the officers. The senior officer on the scene was Detective Isabella Rossi. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen everything the city of Los Angeles had to offer. She took in the tableau in a single, sweeping glance: the expensive storefront, the whimpering man in the Aegis security uniform, the shaken pregnant woman, and the celebrity action star who looked ready to commit murder. "Somebody tell me what the hell happened here," Rossi commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "He attacked me." Maddox gasped from the ground, pointing a trembling, unbroken finger at Stephen. "Unprovoked. I'm an officer of Aegis Global. That lunatic broke my arm. My collarbone." Paramedics, arriving with the police, began to work on Maddox. At the same time, another medic gently guided Elena toward a portable stretcher. "I'm okay," Elena said weakly, wincing as she settled onto it. "He's moving, the baby is still moving." Rossi knelt beside Maddox, her expression unreadable. "You've got a suspected wrist fracture, a broken clavicle, and you can barely breathe," she observed calmly. "And you're telling me it was unprovoked?" She looked up at Stephen. "He kicked my wife," Stephen stated, his voice flat and cold as a morgue slab. "My 8-month pregnant wife. He kicked her and knocked her to the ground." A heavy silence fell over the assembled officers. They exchanged uneasy glances. This was no longer a simple assault case. Detective Rossi turned to the paramedic tending to Elena. "Can you confirm an assault on her?" The paramedic nodded grimly. "There's significant bruising already forming on her right thigh, consistent with a kick. She has abrasions on her shoulder and hip from the fall. She was definitely assaulted." Rossi's gaze hardened. She stood up and faced Maddox again. "Did you kick this woman, Mr. Maddox?" "She was non-compliant. She was aggressive." Maddox sputtered, his lies weak and desperate. "That's not true," a voice cut in. All heads turned. A young woman, no older than 20, stepped forward from the crowd, holding her smartphone out like a shield. I saw the whole thing. I started recording the second he started yelling at her. Rossi's eyes lit up. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see that. The young woman nodded and hit play. The small screen illuminated the scene for Rossi and two other officers who gathered around. The video was clear, the audio crisp. It showed everything: Maddox's aggressive posture, Elena's calm, firm replies. It captured his sneering insult about her baby's manners. And then, in undeniable, horrifying detail, it showed his leg swinging out and kicking her, the fall, the shocked screams of the crowd. The video continued, showing Stephen's arrival, the brief, tense confrontation, and the brutally efficient, lightning-fast series of strikes that followed. When the video ended, the silence was profound. The officers looked from the phone to Maddox, then to Stephen, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. Rossi didn't hesitate. She looked at her uniformed officers. Get Mr. Maddox into custody. Get him to the hospital for treatment, and then book him. Assault with force likely to produce great bodily injury. I want his statement, his weapon, his badge, and I want Aegis Global's corporate office notified immediately. He's their liability now. Maddox's face went sheet white with terror. What? You're arresting me? I'm the victim here. Detective Rossi leaned down, her face inches from his. Her voice was ice. You assaulted a pregnant civilian on camera, lied about it to a police officer, and disgraced the concept of authority. You're not the victim. You're the suspect. Two officers hauled the moaning security chief to his feet and guided him toward a cruiser. Rossi then walked over to Stephen, her demeanor professional but with a hint of empathy. Mr. Seagal. I want to apologize on behalf of, well, on behalf of sanity. What you did was technically assault. But given the circumstances. Apologies don't fix what he did, Stephen said, his gaze fixed on Elena as she was prepared for transport. They don't erase the fear. He walked to Elena's side, his stony expression finally softening as he took her hand. I've got you, he murmured, kissing her knuckles. I was so scared, Stephen, she whispered, her eyes full of tears. You don't ever have to be scared again, he promised. As the paramedics wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance, Rossi spoke quietly to Stephen. You'll want to follow them to the hospital. We'll need your official statement later. Stephen turned, his dark eyes locking onto the detectives. I'm not going to the hospital first, he said. I'm going to your station. Rossi raised an eyebrow. To give your statement? No, Stephen replied, his voice deadly serious. I'm going to file charges. And then I'm going to call my lawyer. We're not just going after him. We're going after the machine that built him. 30 minutes later, Steven Seagal walked through the automatic glass doors of the LAPD's West LA division. He moved with a quiet, lethal purpose that parted the usual precinct chaos like a ship's bow through water. He didn't ask for directions, he went straight to the detective's bureau and asked for Detective Rossi. She met him in a small, sterile interview room. Mr. Seagal, she began, I have to give you the standard warning. While it's unlikely the DA will press charges against you given the extreme provocation and the video evidence, your actions do constitute. I understand, Stephen cut her off, his voice calm. I'm not here to talk about my actions. I'm here to talk about his. And his employers. Just then, another man entered the room. He was in his 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a suit that cost more than the room's furniture. This was Julian Croft, Seagal's lawyer, a man known in Hollywood for being more shark than human. Detective, Croft said, his voice smooth as silk. My client is prepared to give a full statement. He is the victim of a vicious, unprovoked attack on his family. We are here to ensure that the perpetrator, Mr. Cade Maddox, and his employer, Aegis Global Security, are held fully accountable. For the next hour, Stephen gave a precise, detailed account of the events. He left out emotion, focusing only on the facts. The threats, the insults, the kick, the fall. When he was done, Julian Croft took over. Detective Rossi, the lawyer began, we will be filing a civil suit against Aegis Global Security for negligent hiring, failure to properly train, and vicarious liability in the assault committed by their employee. Mr. Maddox has, according to our preliminary findings, a documented history of excessive force complaints from his time in the military police, all of which were easily discoverable with a competent background check. Rossi simply listened, nodding slowly. This was out of her hands now, elevated to a level of corporate and legal warfare she rarely dealt with. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for Aegis. The video, leaked from one of the dozen phones that had recorded it, went supernova online. Within hours, it had millions of views under headlines like, Beverly Hills Security Brutally Kicks Pregnant Woman. The fact that the woman was Steven Seagal's wife and that he had personally intervened only added fuel to the fire. Aegis Global's PR department went into meltdown. Their initial statement, a weak offering about an isolated incident and a suspended employee, was torn to shreds by the public. Major clients, the luxury brands of Elysian Row, private banks, wealthy individuals, began to call, their voices laced with panic. They were paying for discreet, professional security, not for thuggish agents who created viral incidents of brutality. The CEO of Aegis, a man named Marcus Thorne who usually operated from a soundproof office 40 stories above the city, was forced to make a public statement. He stood before a bank of microphones, his face pale, and announced a full, top-to-bottom internal investigation. But the damage was done. The stock price of their parent company dipped. The Elysian Row Business Association summarily terminated their multi-million-dollar contract. In a sterile conference room, Thorne and his board of directors watched the video on a large screen. They saw Maddox, their hand-picked site supervisor, their symbol of authority, sneering and then kicking Elena. They saw his utter and complete dismantlement at the hands of her husband. This is a disaster, one board member breathed. The Seagal lawsuit alone could cost us tens of millions. It's not the money, Thorne said, his voice grim as he watched Steven's precise, brutal knee strike land on the screen. It's the image. We sell an image of impenetrable, elite security. And that man, he tore it apart in 5 seconds. He made us look like incompetent bullies. He made us look weak. Meanwhile, back at the hospital, Elena was resting. The doctors had confirmed that the baby was unharmed, his heartbeat strong and steady. The diagnosis for her was a severely bruised leg, a sprained hip, and multiple contusions, but nothing permanent. The emotional toll, however, was another matter. Steven sat by her bedside, holding her hand, the silent sentinel. His phone buzzed incessantly, with calls from his agent, his publicist, and Julian Croft. He ignored them all. The only thing that mattered was the steady rise and fall of his wife's chest and the rhythmic beep of the fetal monitor. He had dealt with the immediate threat. Now, his lawyer and the churning gears of public outrage were dismantling the machine that had created it. He had started a war, not just with his fists, but with the full force of his resources. And it was a war he intended to win. The courtroom was packed. The sentencing of Cade Maddox was the final act in a drama that had captivated the city. The viral video had been played again, this time on a massive screen for the judge and jury, its brutal clarity silencing the entire chamber. Marisol's testimony, delivered with quiet dignity, had been devastating. Eyewitness after eyewitness had confirmed her account. The jury had needed less than 2 hours. Guilty on all charges. Now, Maddox stood before the judge, no longer in the imposing Aegis uniform but in a baggy, county-issue orange jumpsuit. His arm was in a sling, his face was pale, and the arrogance had been sandblasted away, leaving behind only a hollow-eyed, pathetic man. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness and severity, looked down at him from her bench. Her voice was cold and clear. Mr. Maddox, you were entrusted with a position of authority. You were paid to protect the public. Instead, you became the very danger people needed protection from. You assaulted a woman, a pregnant woman, for no reason other than your own inflated ego and cruel disposition. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. You disgraced the idea of security. You dishonored every good man and woman who wears a uniform with the intent to serve. Your actions were not just an assault on Ms. Seagal, they were an assault on the public's trust. The sentence was delivered like a hammer blow. 3 years in state prison for aggravated assault. Permanent revocation of his security license. Mandatory anger management and psychological counseling. And a lifetime restraining order barring him from any contact with Elena or Steven Seagal. The gavel slammed down. Justice, formal and final, had arrived. Weeks later, a new, deeper calm had settled over the Seagal home, nestled in the quiet hills overlooking the city. Elena sat on a wide porch swing, a soft breeze rustling the leaves of the ancient oaks around them. Her baby bump was more pronounced, a beautiful, perfect sphere of life, and the glow had returned to her face. She looked peaceful. Steven came out onto the porch, carrying 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea. He handed one to her and sat beside her, the swing groaning slightly under their combined weight. They sat in comfortable silence for a long time, watching the sun begin its slow descent. You know, Elena said finally, her voice soft, the lawyers said we could have bankrupted his company. You didn't have to tell them to settle. Steven took a sip of his tea. I didn't want their money, he replied, his voice a low rumble. I wanted their teeth. They fired their CEO, restructured their entire hiring and training process, and issued a public apology. That's worth more than money. It's a lesson. She looked down at her belly, a small, thoughtful smile on her lips. When our son is old enough, and he asks what kind of man his father is, what should I tell him? Steven turned to look at her, a faint, rare smile touching the corners of his mouth. That his dad broke a bully in half on Rodeo Drive? Elena laughed, a light, happy sound that seemed to make the whole porch brighter. Maybe the edited version. He reached over, his large, powerful hand gently covering hers on her belly. He could feel the faint flutter of a kick from within. You tell him the truth, Steven said, his voice serious now, but full of a deep, resonant warmth. You tell him his father protects what matters. Always. They sat together as the sky turned from orange to purple, 2 mugs of tea growing cold, their hands intertwined. A small bird landed on the porch rail, chirped once, and flew off into the twilight. The storm had passed. But the certainty of its power remained. The world had been reminded that some lines should never be crossed, and that true strength isn't about the uniform you wear or the authority you're given, but about the ferocity with which you defend your own. What happened to Cade Maddox serves as a stark reminder that power without compassion is just brutality. What do you think is the right way to hold people in authority accountable? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We encourage a healthy and respectful discussion. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content that matters.